Sarah, obviously you've been listening to every word, and we did hear Prince Harry say, I don't know, 18 times, when you would have thought he would be so well briefed by his legal team and also would have read his own testimony so carefully and be so familiar with all of the stuff that he's complaining about, that he would know everything and wouldn't say, I don't know.
Some of those questions were about, well, who do you think hacked your phone or whose phone was hacked? And he was saying, I don't know. And as we heard him repeat yesterday, you'll have to ask the journalists that information. Why don't you know? Well, he said because evidence has disappeared or been destroyed. There were claims that emails had been invented later on to try and get through some of the litigation. He claimed that sources were made up in order to get stories out there. So voicemails would be listened to and then stories would be concocted around those. It's very much a theme from Harry. Don't read anything you read in the tabloid press. He dismissed everything that was put to him and says, well, that's not true. I think generally today he started off fairly light-hearted. He had a very strong "Good morning, Mr. Green." He wanted to assert himself there in the court. There were a few tetchy moments, there were a few clashes. He had to be reminded that it wasn't his job to be asking the questions. We saw him look a little bit emotional when he was asked by his lawyer what it had been like to sit in the witness box, to know that the media, who he is bringing to court here, was watching, and he took a deep intake of breath and said a lot. He made an impassioned plea and said his whole life he'd been misled by the media. And I think ultimately this is what it comes down to for Harry. This was about emotions. This was about passion. He didn't always have the facts at his fingertips, but perhaps that wasn't his role in this, and that it's going to be the job of his barrister now, David Sherborne, to get those facts through other witnesses.
So what's going to happen for the next 7 weeks? Because that's how long we're expecting this to go on, isn't it?
Yes, well, we're expecting a decision in August. We've got another couple of weeks of witnesses to be called. Jane Kerr, who was there this afternoon, followed on from Prince Harry. She will continue giving evidence tomorrow in the witness box. The judge a little frustrated. They're running behind time. He was concerned about timetabling issues. She's faced some very robust questioning today from Prince Harry's lawyer. There was a very marked change in tone. We saw a fairly deferential tone on both sides towards Prince Harry over the last day and a half. But once Jane Kerr got in the witness box, David Sherborne was not pulling any punches at all.
What sorts of things is he levelling at her?
Well, he asked her why she hadn't listed certain witnesses in her witness statement, why she hadn't listed one of her jobs, which was assistant news editor at the Mirror. He has been talking about her use of third parties and private investigators. Why would she be getting information? Was she aware that they were gathering information unlawfully? Was she turning a blind eye to that?
What did she say?
So she said no, she wasn't aware. No, they were getting things like addresses or family trees or births, marriages, deaths, for example. She often said she couldn't remember. This is a case that dates back many years,
Yes.
of course. But it was a tough time. And at one point, Andrew Green, KC, the Mirror's barrister, accused Harry's lawyer of an ambush. And the judge intervened and said, well, no, actually, it's not an ambush. It's building towards his next point. But certainly very tough. And Prince Harry watching the whole thing unfold.
Are we surprised that Jane Kerr would say, I don't know, I can't remember, I don't know?
No.
You would have thought that there would be notes and I don't know, whatever communications that she was making with her team at the time. It wouldn't all just be on the fly with nothing to show
She
for it,
seemed
would
to be
it?
saying that this was a daily occurrence. These were the kind of phone calls that she was making on every story in order to get information, to send journalists out, to have journalists getting interviews, for example, that this was happening all of the time. She just can't recall the details of it.
And then what happens in a court case where Prince Harry says he can't remember and the Mirror say they can't remember? Then what happens?
Well, this isn't a criminal trial, so this is a civil case, and it's up to the judge to make that decision. And the judge is going to be weighing up both sides, and it comes down to a balance of probabilities. This isn't having to prove beyond all reasonable doubt. And ultimately, the judge will decide, and he will decide the outcome of this, whether or not there has been any wrongdoing. And then what happens? Does he award damages to either party? I mean, Harry isn't in this for the money. this is a crusade for him. This is very much a mission. He wants to take on the media, and this is just the start of what he's described as his life's work.
What on earth can he do next?
He's got more cases to come, and he wants to transform the media landscape, and he wants to transform press regulation in this country.
It's
and
very interesting, though, because when you read it, you read various journalists' interpretations of this, they say or claim that the British, the great kind of bulwark of British journalists, were always incredibly lenient and affectionate towards Prince Harry. Always liked him enormously. He was incredibly popular. I felt terribly, terribly sorry about the loss of his mother at such a young age. Enjoyed his personality. Liked the fact that he was kind of a bit of a drinker and a bit like the ladies and all the things.
Extremely
You know,
popular.
he was
Wasn't
extremely
he? One of the most popular members of the royal family.
Exactly. So it seems that there's a vast kind of chasm between what he thinks is the treatment that he received from the press and what the press thinks is the treatment that it meted out to their favourite, Prince Harry. It's really a very astounding disconnect, isn't it?
There is a very brief mention in his witness statement that, yes, they covered the good things and the positive side as well. But it seems to me that Prince Harry is in that space where he can only see the negatives and he only recalls the negative headlines. But that each and every headline, and he has said that each and every sound of a flashbulb on a paparazzi camera is like a trigger for him. And that strikes me that is what is happening now. Even today, he brought up the headlines today. He had read the headlines this morning and he raised that and how it had made him feel.
And how had it made him feel?
He said he found it disturbing.
You see lots of people say, well, you brought the case, and if you hadn't come, and if you hadn't stood in court, if you hadn't broken with history and precedent in this way, and been the first person in 130 years in the royal family to stand in court, then none of this wouldn't have happened and you wouldn't be on the front pages.
And one of the most interesting points that came out in today's evidence was why he is here and how this came about. And he described a meeting bumping into, as he described it, David Sherborne in France. And he said it was 2018. He said he'd mentioned it in his book Spare. I've been trying to find it in Spare. He and Meghan did go to stay with Elton John and David Furnish in the south of France in 2019, he writes in the book, when they made a plea to Elton and David that they were really struggling and they wanted an escape. And I wonder if that came about then, because we know he has cases ongoing with Elton John as well. So he appears to have met David Sherborne, who talked to him about whether he might have a case. And his motivation, he said, my wife and I, we wondered whether it was a way to take on the intrusion and the abuse and to do it in a different way and not using the institutions, lawyers, those of the royal family, who we know he felt let down by, and that they had closed the door on Harry and Meghan and turned a blind eye to their complaints.